Welcome back to She Can, where women lead by example. We interview women from all walks of life, and they lead with their stories and their insights, because it's easier to be what you can see. And I'm really excited to talk to Melissa Petro today. Melissa, welcome to She Can. You are a freelance writer, former sex worker, and survivor of mass media humiliation turned stay-at-home mom of two, activist, author of Shame on You, How to Be a Woman in the Age of Mortification, which has been published last autumn by Putnam Books, which is a division of Random House. It's a rousing exploration of shame and how it affects women. It's equal parts memoir and investigative reporting that dives deep into the unpacking of how a single emotion can permeate so much of our lives. Melissa, this book is really important. I want you to tell us a bit more about your story and how you got to where you are today, and publishing this book that is about your story, but it's also so much about the collective.
Right. So I started working as a writer, I would say 2 decades ago, 20 years ago, in a workshop, just beginning to unpack complicated experiences that I'd been taught to keep secret. Like so many women, things had happened in my life, and I had made choices that felt irreconcilable with the woman I was asked to be by others. So making meaning of those experiences became not just an interest, but an obsession. And not even just an obsession, but a necessity, because it was really affecting my mental and physical health, which is what shame does. It is no exaggeration to say, absolutely killing us. Yeah. It affects us physically, emotionally, mentally. Our health is torn apart by this pernicious emotion. And until we're able to feel that feeling and make meaning and articulate our experiences and share them with others in these safe ways, we're really burdened and held down by that feeling. So that's what I began to do 20 years ago. I started learning how to write and tell my story. And 20 years later, I got to interview 150 plus women about their experiences with this emotion and how they've been affected and overcome, ultimately, the impact of shame.
Melissa, so shame and guilt, we all know, are the lowest emotions in the book of all emotions. And society makes sure that we women are sort of stuck in that situation where we're kept small, less than, unworthy of, inadequate, in inverted comma, bad versus good. You know, we always have to be so good. Tell us a little bit more what you learned from interviewing 150 women and your own story. What is shame and why is it so bad?
Right. So I don't want to say shame is bad. Shame's a feeling like any other, like joy or anger or fear or, worry, frustration, all of the messiness of humanity. Like, that's part of it. It's part of the package. You're going to experience pride, you're going to experience shame. And there's nothing unnatural about feeling shame, but there's nothing natural about the way it's weaponized against women in our world. So the ways that women are uniquely and disproportionately impacted by shame, the way it's weaponized against us from letting us achieve our goals and know our worth, that is not natural. That is something we can look at critically and that we can overcome collectively. So what I learned when I interviewed women and when I looked at my own story was that all of our shame triggers are unique. So what one person is ashamed of, another person might think of as no big deal. I mean, one of my driving motivators to make meaning of this emotion was that my experience as a sex worker, as a woman with experiences in the sex trade, I felt an enormous amount of shame
Mm.
And what's true is not all sex workers do.
Yeah.
I know I have lots of, you know, associates that they just didn't internalize what
Mm.
was what women with experiences in the sex trades are constantly assaulted with. So I did, even though I knew better intellectually. I knew there was nothing wrong with what I was doing. I knew why I made the choices I did, and I knew I knew so much more than the world did. I still let them influence the way I felt about myself. And that's what shame is. It's this feeling of fundamental difference and potential inadequacy and inferiority. Um, and it's not what you've done, really, it's who you are.
Yeah.
So that I had done something that society looks down on made me look down on myself ultimately. And everyone has it. We all carry around these things about ourselves, either things that have happened to us or things we've done or just facts about ourselves that we fear makes us less worthy or completely unworthy and potentially unbelonging, so that we're just not worthy of the love that others more freely receive.
Yeah.
We've all got these things, and they're all it's a powerful impact on our lives, whether we acknowledge it or not. And in fact, the less we acknowledge it, the more impactful
Yeah.
shame can.
Yeah. Yeah. It when it's a repressed emotion, it can wreak havoc. Melissa, tell us a little bit more about this the journey of writing the book. How cathartic did it feel? How did it change you? Tell us a bit more about that.
Right. So I started, like I said, I started the book in my early 20s just to get it out.
Mm.
What I'd gone through, the choices I'd made to really articulate the nuances, what had been pleasurable, what had been painful, and everything in between, right? And I found these writing workshops that were, to use a word, they were safe containers for me. So in psychology, this is the idea that there's a space where you can just fully be yourself and let anything out, and that room will contain it.
Mm.
They'll back to you the appropriate response. It's not too much for them. They're not going to avoid it. That just right reception. I found places that could hear my story without judging me, without overreacting or underreacting. I was neither dismissed nor judged. I was just held. And finding those spaces, I was able then to realign myself with the woman I was and the goals I'd had for my life prior to becoming a sex worker, and make different choices moving forward. And that's really what shame can do. It can kind of keep us trapped in decisions that might not serve us, and that might not be, we might not be living up to our ideals or our expectations, but because we feel ashamed, we don't feel as if we have much power or control to move forward.
Yeah.
Whereas when we do reconcile ourselves with our feelings about our own behaviors and choices, we can start to make better choices for
Yeah.
ourselves.
Yeah.
So that's what I was able to do after becoming a writer. And I also stopped drinking and joined a program of recovery. And those rooms also became safe spaces where I could share my innermost feelings without any fear of judgment or recrimination. Um, I had 4 years sober in a program of recovery, and so many years as a writer, and then I started to publish my work and places like Huffington Post and even smaller literary journals. And then one day my story was found by a reporter at the New York Post, and it was front page news. Now by then I had transitioned from sex work into a job as a public school teacher. So you can imagine the headline: Bronx teacher admits I'm an ex-hooker. News reporters following me around taking pictures, because who can imagine a woman had once done this and now they're a public school teacher? It was just like, right? So enter shame.
Yeah.
Here I am again,
Mm.
very, very publicly humiliated in a way that I had kind of already gone through, reconciling myself with those choices and those experiences. Now I was doing it on this like really big public stage. Fortunately, I did have a considerable amount of resilience at that point where I was able to move through what I now recognize as mass media humiliation, with a certain amount of grace, but it's an incredibly painful experience, and dangerous. I mean, they really just wanted me dead, did not care about no concern for who I was or my experience.
Wow. Yeah. Melissa, and how did you turn this pain into your purpose? How did you, I mean, you were well on your way, and then you had this traumatic public shaming happen. And what happened then?
I really had I had to make a choice. I had a therapist at the time who suggested I change my name and start. She actually suggested I take my boyfriend's name. And that, I guess that was an option. Maybe for some people that would be an option. You would just pretend it didn't happen and move on. But that's kind of what I tried to do first when I tried to transition from sex work. I got a relationship and I had a normal job, and it just haunted me. I couldn't just pretend that this thing hadn't happened. For a period of time, I had worked as a stripper, and I needed to understand what that said about me. And so by then I had done that work, that like I knew that when you have a presumably shameful experience, and it becomes what's called a concealable stigmatized identity. This is something that happened that I could keep a secret, and move on with my life. For me, I knew that I couldn't. I couldn't just change my name and move on and pretend like that didn't happen. And what's true also about mass media humiliation is that you really can't hide from it. It really does have material effects. You can try to like disguise or erase your social media platforms or histories, but you can't control it. And it's always threatening. Like there's always this looming threat when you try to hide from the truth of like your life. So I, instead of going that route, went what felt to me like in some ways an easier but a braver route, which is to just own it and not to double down. Like I wasn't going to become the character that they had sort of portrayed me as, this like villainous, I got away with this, and now I'm teaching your kids. And this idea that I was somehow like deceptive or malicious at any point, like that wasn't true. But what was true was that I was a woman with experiences in the sex trade. I had worked for some time as a stripper, and for a very brief period of time as a call girl. And then I had become a public school teacher. And there was, in my view, nothing inappropriate about any of that content, other than the fact that it's illegal, which it shouldn't be. I hadn't done, in my eyes, anything wrong. So really owning the truth of that, believing it to be so, doesn't mean I always believed it to be so, and didn't mean I didn't feel shame, because I did. I was humiliated and I felt ashamed frequently through that period. But I felt it rather than denying it. And that was the choice I made. And I am so grateful to have made that choice. Not that it is always easy.
No.
At all. But what is the alternative?
Yeah. Melissa, it's an unbelievably courageous thing to do, because we all know that a traumatic experience like that is really difficult, and the shame and the guilt is overwhelming. And for you to overcome that and turn it into a book and turn it into a purpose is really no mean feat. Now, shame is also a really big feminist issue, and it's something women have to think about. Most women have to think about in their lives. It's also a tool for patriarchy to control women, to divide us, to keep us small, it's a social and political issue as much as it is a personal issue. It's a really collective issue. Tell us a little bit what you feel why that is such an important thing for feminists to talk about, to think about.
Absolutely. So, it really didn't strike me as such a universal and ubiquitous and feminist issue until I became a mother.
Mm.
And here I was being the the portrait of what women are meant to be. And I still felt myself walking that tightrope of femininity. I could not um, escape the constant surveillance, the judgment, the criticism. And in anything, if anything, it was even worse now because it was so, there were so many microaggressions against me as a mother, constant internal and external criticisms that I just was not doing good enough. I was not good enough as a mom. My kids, if their hands weren't, gloved in the winter, it was, everything was an indictment of myself and my character, it felt. And again, some of that was internalized and some of it was like, shaming. Mothers are constantly shamed. And then I realized, this is not a unique experience to me as a woman with experiences in the sex trades. I'd been that, and now I'm here. I'm the complete opposite, and I'm feeling it again. I really realized we can't get it right. And this isn't an accident. It's not just a coincidence that women are being suppressed and oppressed by this emotion, that it's being weaponized against us, that we're being conditioned to make ourselves small. That's not an accident. This is by design.
Yeah.
We're supposed to be small. We're supposed to question ourselves. We're supposed to exhaust ourselves trying to live up to these impossible expectations. Because if you go too much, too little, it's impossible to get it right. Here I was, the most respectable, the portrait of respectability, and I still felt very, very wrong. And that's when I really realized that we need to turn away from the busyness of getting it right and start thinking more critically of what right really ought to look like.
Yeah.
And it's not clean countertops and perfectly behaved children or, that, all the ideals that have been impressed upon us. There's something deeper and more important that we ought to be attending to.
Yeah.
And that became the book.
Melissa, oh my gosh, yes, and is all I want to say to that. Tell us a little bit in your experience and in going through the motions and writing the book, how can we escape this shame cycle that we women seem to be stuck in for parts of our lives, or maybe also every day?
Every day, because it's so ubiquitous. It's so seemingly small, those attacks on our self-worth, and constant.
Yeah.
I think the first step for me was really identifying it as shame, because we don't think of ourselves, especially, if you're a hyper independent, ambitious, successful, and accomplished woman, we wouldn't think of the problem being shame. We don't hate ourselves, we think. We might not think that we hate ourselves, but we might think that we could do better. So there's this
Always.
constant niggly little voice that says that wasn't good enough, you could do better. We could be better. We're not good enough, we need to be better. We can do that better. That constant striving to do more, be better, as if we're not good enough as we are. And this really became recognizable for me when I found myself in communities with like objectively successful, accomplished, beautiful women who just always found a way to undermine themselves and to feel small and diminished and exhausted and to blame themselves for that exhaustion. It felt so self-perpetuating, and so obvious when I could see what happening to other women. Then I was able to look at my own life and say, wow, all of those feelings of inadequacies and not good enough, that's shame. Now, where is it coming from? So when we've developed shame resilience, it's really about starting with that feeling rather than running from it and doing better. sitting with it and thinking, oh, I feel less than. I feel a fear of unbelonging, of being rejected, of not being lovable as I am. Then we turn, okay, so something triggered that. What is that? Is there something about my personality? Probably, but there's more probably there's something about our culture. So what is reinforcing that feeling? Why do I feel that way? What are the narratives that I'm living up to or not living up to? And do I agree with them or not? Because sometimes we won't live up to an expectation and we'll feel a sense of failure. But if we stop to critically examine the expectation, we realize it's not really something that we value anyway. Yeah. So starting to develop a cultural awareness. Okay, here's where these messages are coming from. Here's what they want me to be. Is that what I want myself to be? Is that important to me? Now, sometimes women like us, like it is important. It's important to have a clean house. It's important to be financially stable. It's important to be professionally successful. It's important to have children who are well behaved and happy and taken care of. All of it is important, right? That's, I think, is really the dilemma of a modern woman. We value everything. So sometimes it's really about like living with some grace and realizing that we may have all of these ideals and we may have all of these values and we may not be able to live up to them. And it's no like defect of self. It's just we are like human beings having a human experience in our human bodies.
Yes.
So and actually we learn that by doing this, right? By talking about our vulnerabilities, talking about those moments of imperfection, talking about what we value, what we desire, what we dream of, what we fear, and hearing from others that that's the human experience. Here we are.
Yeah. And yes, to the grace for ourselves, and the grace in the conversations, and unearthing all of these authentically lived experience and vulnerable experience of girls and women around the world, and often also men, right? Because also men have shame, and we equally stick them into a shame cycle where if they don't if they're not the breadwinners and they don't produce and they're the big guy and they keep us safe, and all of those
now more than ever.
Yeah.
Now they're also expected to be changing the diapers and being at home with and being an involved father. And like there's all of these other responsibilities on the feminist man, just like the woman. Now we're being overburdened with responsibilities that are just impossible to fulfill. And they're experiencing shame as we do. Absolutely.
Melissa, what do you feel really matters to you now? You've got this book out in the world. You've told your story very beautifully. What really matters to you now, and how do you want to matter in the world going forwards?
I love that question. That's such a great question because it can be confusing. Oh, sales, like all the things like markers of success or I mean, when you ask me that question, it comes, my kids matter. That's what matters. Everything drops for them. Right. So they matter. My readers matter. When I hear stories from people, this is the thing I need to say, whatever that is, that's what matters. When I can be that safe container for people and they can come to me and share their story. I work with writers of all ages and experiences, people who have that thing or that opinion or whatever. They've got something, know something about the world that is being underheard or unexplored or silenced. And they have a burning desire to share that and to share it through their lens and oftentimes the lens of personal experience. I want to help those people amplify their messages, find platforms like I did. I started writing for places like Huffington Post, and now I write for everyone, and everyone can hear my big stories and opinions, and I don't feel a lot of self-consciousness when it comes to that. I have a lot of resilience, and it's a beautiful way to live. And I just want to like make people feel that feeling of freedom that we feel when we get to be ourselves out loud.
Melissa, yeah. Thank you for leading with that, for leading with your story, and for with all the lessons that you've learned so far. It's making me emotional. Tell us a little bit more of how you want to lead going forwards, Melissa.
Um, I like to lead by empowering others to find the leadership within themselves, if that
Mm.
makes sense. So
Yes.
I love to ask questions, and they're like essential questions that anyone at any place in their life can ask and answer. Letting people find the answers for themselves is so much more powerful than telling them what they need
Yes.
to know.
Yes.
You know,
Oh,
when I work with survivors of sex trafficking or sexual exploitation, like you can't tell them they're being exploited. No one could tell me at 19 years old that I didn't know exactly what I was doing when I started stripping at a club in Mexico. Like I knew what I was doing and I had made a choice, okay? And I did. And I did. And I did it.
yeah.
It's so much more complicated, right? But like no one could have compelled me to behave differently. And certainly no one could have shamed me into behaving differently. I had to
Mm.
come to understand myself and my experience on my own terms. So when I lead others to their own truths. And I'm not even like telling you what they like. I'm not even like, there's not like some secret agenda that I'm trying to like covertly lead people to. Like, I am seriously happy for people to like believe what they do and to embody those beliefs. Even when I disagree with them, that's fine. Just do it out loud so that we can have a conversation. And I think right now, especially, we are all so afraid of being real. And there is so much division in America, especially.
Yeah.
We're too afraid to live out loud. And and things get worse, not better, when we're silenced. And
Mm.
I don't care what you have to say it out loud and let's talk about it. And I will come to you with curiosity and listen. And then I will speak and we'll engage in that way. If we could shift our culture from a culture of shame and silence to a culture of empathy and compassion, where people voice their truths, we would all be so much more better off.
Yes. And oh, yes, that's exactly what we're doing at She Can. And, to have those conversations and to gracefully agree to disagree, or the other way around, or whatever it may be, but for people to tell their truth. Because once you've got all the facts on a table, you can find solutions together. And because we have to unify and we can't stay in this divisive, crazy narrative that we are part of right now, we need to find solutions. Melissa, what would you like to have as your legacy? How would you like to look back at your life and think, yeah, this was my thing. I did that and I did that really well.
For there was a period of time where if I like got hit by a car or something terrible, tragic happened to me, the headline would probably have said hooker teacher.
Mm.
Like it would have led me back to that. And for a
Mm.
very long time, I mean, I'm still talking about it now. It's not like it's not still part of my narrative, but I can have I can do these interviews without ever bringing up that story. I can
Mm.
just talk about shame and never talk about my own personal experience that is evidence to support my arguments. I don't need to have that use of self.
Yeah.
Um, I can just talk about why we need to live out loud and
Mm.
why authenticity leads to freedom. Um, I think I'm very grateful. I will never not be like my story. But I am also grateful that I am so much more than what happened to me and the complicated choices I made at 19 years old. Like I am so much more than my shame or presumably shameful experience. And I think if I were to leave a legacy, it would be that I help others to also believe that they are so much more than what they fear they are.
Yeah. So, Melissa, what are your plans and goals for this year and beyond? Where's your journey going?
Oh my gosh, it's so funny. My friend calls the first book a first pancake. And when she said that, I was like so offended because I do love my book, but I also had no idea what would happen once you write a book and you come out with a book. Like, I just thought people would run to me and like put me on big stages and pay me lots of money to like talk. But that's not ever what happens, apparently. So I feel a bit naive and embarrassed because it's also an experience that people have. And so I had to kind of regroup more recently. Like, okay, what am I gonna be when I grow up? Now I'm growing up. I am grown up. What am I gonna be? I'm gonna keep teaching and keep sharing the messages in my book because that is what I'm here to do. I really believe it. For today, this is the message I'm just going to stand up out loud and share again and again. And I'm going to teach other people to do the same.
Beautiful. Melissa, so what would you like people to take away from your story? What are the main things we should take away?
You know, if you read my book or hear my story and only remember one other thing, is that there is a lot of freedom and happiness in being real. And this is an end of a long, complicated, and at times very painful journey. So that isn't to diminish that pain or you try to erase it. It's not always easy to come out. At times, it's very, very painful and there are very real consequences. I could lean into that and I could talk about what those material consequences are when we live out loud in a way that really alienates others and that does reject, that does like lead to rejection. But ultimately, there is so much freedom and joy. And I want people to believe that whatever keeps you captive, whatever shame keeps you small, there is so much freedom beyond that. Just keep going.
I'm just learning that now, Melissa. And yes, and there's a lot to potentially unpack in just that conversation. Melissa, I feel we haven't really talked about the fact that women pit themselves against other women. We're always pinned against each other. I think we should talk about this for a minute.
Well, and the book ends that friendship is really the antidote, but it can be fraught, right? Let's be real. We are our own worst enemies at times, and we can project that onto others. When we see women living in a way that doesn't, fit the norm, when they're doing it better or worse than us, there's that measuring ourselves against others. And again, that's not accidental. That's part of this design to keep us small and unorganized. We're not then working collectively and sharing our goals and accomplishing those goals because we're fractured from each other and from ourselves. So yeah, I do think it's necessary that we acknowledge that challenge, and I think honor the one potentiality that we can move beyond that. And hopefully we've all had those experiences. Hopefully we've found mentors or mentees, if you need a bit of a safer relationship, someone that you can be that person for, or someone who has been that person for you. And of course, friends, where it's this mutuality and you can be that for each other. And we've experienced the freedom in those relationships with other women. And that gives us more confidence to be that person for ourselves when we start to experience it with others.
Yeah. Melissa, so if you could write a postcard to every human in this world with one sentence, what would that sentence be?
Be real. Be real.
Yeah, beautiful. Melissa, I'm so grateful for your story because it shows a lot of things. It shows that we can alchemize pain in our lives into purpose. we can sit with the emotions that we deem sort of bad and unwanted and really alchemize them into something good, that we need to organize and collaborate as women, that we can live out loud, and that that's a good thing, even though it does alienate other people, and that we can show up authentically and vulnerably. And I would like to really get everyone to go out and buy your beautiful book. Shame on you, Melissa Petro. And I'm so grateful for your time and your story today.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is so wonderful.